and welcome to a special episode of Mastery TV. Mastery TV is our effort to pull back the curtain at the Mastery School of Hawken and really dig into issues around teaching, learning, and the way forward. And I'm really excited about this particular episode titled Cultivating Black Boy Joy. And this episode is actually centered around an event that we held back in January where we invited prospective families to talk about how the Mastery School is working to ensure the social, emotional, physical safety of Black boys on our campus and in our community, as well as, how can schools partner with families to make sure that Black boys are thriving on our campus and in our community. And so we invited some of our community partners and had just a wonderful and uplifting and empowering conversation facilitated by our Dean of Students, Mr. Ambrose Fadarotti. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope it really gets you thinking about how to cultivate Black boy joy in your home, in your community, and in education. Enjoy.
So by way of framing our time together, I just want to talk a little bit about the choice of text that we're going to spend some time discussing this morning. We're thinking about this idea of, cultivating Black boy joy. It's certainly Black boy joy is a hashtag, it's trending, but just really about centering the wellness, the curiosity, the individuality of young Black boys in a world that sometimes can be very hostile to those expressions of joy. And so we thought really hard about what kind of text would help center a discussion on the well-being, the health, and of young Black men, and particularly with regard to this age group, right? So the end of middle school, entering into the period where you're sort of starting to make choices about what kind of identity what you want your identity as a Black boy, Black man to mean for you. And our search kept returning us to this one, the one that, if you haven't already received, that you'll receive in the follow-up to this event, which was Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is also a MacArthur Genius Grant Award winner, writes this work really as a conversation between him and his son. And it echoes in its form a book, The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. His goal really is to help his son understand the complexity of what it means to be a Black man, given the history that's built this country and made it what it is to be. Really the enslavement, the oppression, the abuse of Black bodies. And over the last several years, notably right here in Cleveland with Tamir Rice, the question of safety and security of our Black bodies has been thrust to the fore. So we chose this text because we feel like that's exactly where Coates is in trying to talk to his son about what it means to live life as a Black man in America. And we made all these decisions before this last week happened, right? And we feel that our choice is all the more relevant in light of the events in the U.S. Capitol this week. Some parts can be about a bit triggering, but we feel like all parts are pretty honest. And there are moments where the tone of this book reminds you sort of the talk that many of us have had with our parents, or that we've had with our children. But this session is about joy, about the sources of it, about how schools can be a key contributor to the full experience of joy for young men of color and Black boys in particular. Black boy joy for me is finding ways, taking the courage to express what's most uniquely me outside of the messages that we receive, and sharing that with the world, and not trying my best to line up my inside self and how I feel with, and to align that with my outward expression of my identity. And there's many, one of the things that I've learned about in my experience as a Black man has been that we'll get lots of messages about who we're supposed to be. And I think one part of our work is to figure out who we want to be and how to share that with others meaningfully. So that's what it means. That's what it means for me.
So what does Black boy joy look like in my home? It looks like my oldest friends coming over, um, and them speaking about things that matter to them in ways where they don't have to guard what they say because they feel like they're in a safe place. It feels like us watching sports together and laughing. And it feels like us making music together or listening to music together. It feels like us introducing music to one another that we haven't heard and talking about that. It's it's freedom. Um, yeah, that's what it looks like in my house. And that's gonna happen later. So I'm going to experience joy today. Thank you so much for this question.
Thank you for answering, Miss Drain.
I too love this question. Sorry, I was trying to like transcribe everybody's contributions, but I would say Black Boy Joy. I have a 9-year-old son, and I also have a husband. And so Black Boy Joy in my house is them being in front of the TV and doing Let's Dance together, like their dance routines to Smooth Criminal by Michael Jackson. It's them pretending to have a marching band and just marching around the house and being loud and using my pot lids as symbols. It's also just like the affection that I see my husband and my son share, where, you know, there isn't this almost like a toxic masculinity that I feel like Black boys are exposed to early on, where like he still kisses my husband on the cheek, or my husband still, you know, kisses him. They still hug, they cuddle up on the couch, they share blankets, you know, so that's what it looks like in my house. And I melt every time I see it.
In my house, it's honestly just being unapologetically Black, just being himself. Like my son, I have a baby too, but he's only 4 months, so he's not even remotely close to understanding anything yet. But for my teenager, it's really just being himself 100%, not shying away from that, and being very outspoken. I try to teach him respectfully to speak your mind, you know, and that's don't shy away from it. You give respect to people that respect you. So I teach him that, and I just want him to be comfortable in his own skin. And that's really what it's like in our house. It's just being comfortable. He probably thinks I'm crazy because I'm just so myself all the time. You know, I'm me 100% of the time. So, and I just kind of try to display that so that he can see and feel the same way and do the same thing.
So the question that we have next, and we would love for as many folks as are willing to answer, and we'll give about 3 minutes to get these in the chat. Um, the next question asks, what do you need from schools so that you or your child can experience Black Boy Joy? So when you think of schools and what schools can do for you, or what type of environments could cultivate the things that you cultivate at home, what do you need? All right, we've got some good stuff coming through, so I'm just going to read a few things. Um, we have that schools act with urgency to protect Black boys mentally, socially, and physically. Um, to learn more about about African American culture. Sorry, my chat is doing weird things, y'all. I'm trying. 1 second. Okay, boom. To learn more about African American culture outside of Black History Month, and to be able to express our pride and emotions, teaching more on the truth about our history, instilling confidence so that our boys aren't ashamed or afraid to be Black, representation in curriculum, programming outside of just February. So yeah, we got that. A space for my son or all kids to find out who they are, a place to discover their place in the wider community and feel proud of who they are. Um, Schools could do more in the way of exposure by teaching people about African American musicians, teaching kids about racism, how to counter and combat it if they experience it. Hawkins' fair play concepts, development of character through culture, the more accurate and in-depth representation of African American history in the classroom. We've got some good stuff here. So we all have some good ideas about what we would like to see in school spaces, and a lot of them are linked to what we create in home spaces, or what you offered that you create in home spaces.
All right. At this point, it's my sincere pleasure to introduce to you someone who you've heard from a moment ago, but his name is Daniel Gray Kontar, and he's the Kontar, and he's the executive artistic director of 12 Literary Arts right here in Glenville, right around the corner from the Mastery School. Daniel has worked as an advocate for social transformation in the city of Cleveland for more than 25 years. He's an education consultant for the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts and the former chair of the Literary Arts Development at the Cleveland School of the Arts, and as well as a former graduate school fellow at the UC Berkeley's College of Education. His work in arts education has been showcased on PBS NewsHour, the UK Guardian, NPR, and the Christian Science Monitor. His TED Talk discussing youth leadership and public school education has affected the ways our school administrators think about the inclusion of youth and their families in the process of remaking school cultures and curricula. He's also a proud father of his daughter, Paloma Manning Gray, as well as a member of our community advisory board, and really critical and appreciated thought partner for the Mastery School as we've been setting up. So it's my pleasure to introduce Daniel, who will lead us in some conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here to share time and space with you in the digital domain. I'd like to, I think I would love to prepare us for our breakouts, really by sort of going back to James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, which was such important and so pivotal in the shaping of Ta-Nehisi Coates' thinking as he wrote the book that we're going to unpack later. There's a passage in The Fire Next Time, and I want to request that I can share my screen for a moment, because it is probably one of the most important passages for me in The Fire Next Time. And I'd love to share it with you because I think it provides us with some insights. I'm going to start here at the very bottom of page 36, and I will read aloud. Of course, hopefully we can read it together, and hopefully this is big enough for you to see. But Baldwin writes in 1963, "This world is white and they are black. White people hold the power, which means that they are superior to blacks intrinsically. That is, God decreed it so. And the world has innumerable ways of making this difference known and felt and feared. Long before the Negro child perceives this difference, and even longer before he understands it, he has begun to react to it. He has begun to be controlled by it. Every effort made by the child's elders to prepare him for a fate from which they cannot protect him causes him secretly, in terror, to begin to wait, without knowing that he is doing so, his mysterious and inexorable punishment. He must be good, not only in order to please his parents and not only to avoid being punished by them. Behind their authority stands another, nameless and impersonal, infinitely harder to please and bottomlessly cruel. And this filters into the child's consciousness through his parents' tone of voice as he's being exhorted, punished, or loved, in the sudden, uncontrollable note of fear heard in his mother's or his father's voice when he has strayed beyond some particular boundary. He does not know what the boundary is, and he can get no explanation of it, which is frightening enough. But the fear he hears in the voices of his elders is more frightening still. I'm going to stop there. What Baldwin says here is that there is a fear that is innately passed on in the Black child when he's barely even able to recognize his parents' voice. There is a sense of a lack of space for one to be their authentic selves. And this manifests itself on the avenue, in the school, and in fact, in every social institution that the child may come into contact with. Baldwin was also a preacher. And so what Baldwin very clearly also understood was the importance of joy. For Baldwin, one of the places and the single place where he found joy first and foremost was in the church. Why? This is because this was a space where Black children, Black people could feel authentically free. Baldwin recognized this, and he even says this, that as we think about joy, we have to think about those moments, even back in slavery, when Black folk had the capacity to be their authentic selves, when they were worshiping together, when they were celebrating their authentic selves together. And so the question for educators and for school administrators, particularly with respect to teaching Black boys and Black children in general, is how can space be created that will allow Black children and Black boys in particular, particularly given this social moment, how can space be created so that Black boys can be their authentic selves, so that they can be in touch with their sense of purpose, a sense of undeniable hope, a sense of release, and ultimately, and this is what all education does, creativity. How can education spaces be made for Black boys to be their authentic selves and to live and exist and thrive outside of the fear that is manifest within Black children, oftentimes before they even understand language? So this is a challenge. And these are the questions that we can ask. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, some 40 plus years later, says many of the same things that Baldwin said in 1963. And so it's, I think, our pleasure to be able to have conversation using Ta-Nehisi in this time as the backdrop to unpack these questions about how do we create spaces and understand Black boy joy. So I think I'll pass it back to Ambrose so that we can get our marching orders, as it were. Thank you so much.
I think you framed that perfectly. I think you framed that absolutely perfectly. So by way of, again, setting the stage for some of that conversation, we're going to take a moment to read over some of the language from Between the World and Me. The streets were not my only problem. If the streets shackled my right leg, the schools shackled my left. Fail to comprehend the streets and you gave up your body now, but fail to comprehend the schools and you gave up your body later. I suffered at the hands of both, but I resent the schools more. I was a curious boy, but the schools were not concerned with curiosity. They're concerned with compliance. I loved a few of my teachers, but I cannot say that I truly believed any of them. That was exactly how I felt back then. I sensed the schools were hiding something, drugging us with false morality so that we would not see, that we would not ask, why? For us and only us is the other side of free will and free spirits an assault upon our bodies. That's number one. Number two is, the thing to understand about Prince Jones, and I mentioned earlier that Prince Jones, the book is an effort on behalf of Coates to help his son understand essentially police brutality and police-involved killings. Prince Jones was the name of a young man that Ta-Nehisi Coates went to Howard with, who was unfortunately killed by the police, I'll say. The thing to understand about Prince Jones is that he exhibited the whole of his given name. He was handsome. He was tall and brown, built thin and powerful like a wide receiver. He was the son of a prominent doctor. He was born again, a state I did not share but respected. He was kind. Generosity radiated off of him. and he seemed to have a facility with everyone and everything. This can never be true, but there are people who pull the illusion off without effort, and Prince was one of them. I can only say what I saw, what I felt. There are people whom we do not fully know, and yet they live in a warm place within us. And when they are plundered, when they lose their bodies and the dark energy disperses, that place becomes a wound. And here's the final one. So I feared, sorry, getting covered up here by Zoom window. So I feared not just the violence of this world, but the rules designed to protect you from it. The rules that would have you contort your body to address the block, and contort again to be taken seriously by colleagues, and contort again so as not to give the police a reason. All my life, I've heard people tell Black boys and Black girls to be, quote, twice as good, which is to say, quote, accept half as much. These words will be spoken with a veneer of religious nobility, as though they evidence some unspoken quality, some undetected courage, when in fact, all they evidenced was the gun to our head and the hand in our pocket. This is how we lose our softness. This is how they steal our right to smile. No one told those little white children with their tricycles to be twice as good. I imagine their parents telling them to take twice as much. It seemed to me that our own rules redoubled plunder. All right. Challenging, right? And truth telling. And now we're going to take some time to again to express how these quotations resonate with us, and then what does that have to do with the role of schools in cultivating joy?
As Ambrose said, I've been asked to speak a little about how our program at the Mastery School connects to these ideas we've been discussing, and what the school does to create an educational experience where all students, and particularly where Black boys, can thrive. I want to acknowledge that that's work that's not a small thing, because the institutions of school are ones that were designed initially in this country for, wealthy white males, and in many ways the foundations of that educational system still exist and have never actually been completely torn down to be rebuilt. And so in many ways, part of what's so compelling and unbelievably rare about the opportunity that we have here at the Mastery School is we have an opportunity where we've been given not just the freedom, but the charge, the mandate, by, among others, and most importantly, our head of school, Scott Looney, to really redesign the system from the ground up, and only take with us, from the existing educational system, that which serves young people today, here in 2021, with everything that we know about how young people learn, what it takes for them to thrive, and what they need the most. So that's an unbelievably powerful charge, and it's one that I know motivates our whole team to do this work that we get to do. So really what I'm attempting to do here is to highlight some of what our approach does, that I feel most speaks to what our topic is this afternoon. And I wanted to start with a passage from Bettina Love's book, We Want to Do More Than Survive. Bettina Love talks in this book about abolitionist teaching and about the power of freedom dreaming in the work of what she calls abolitionist teaching. And so in the midst of, talking about some really hard things as well this afternoon, and some really hard things in this book, the power of dreaming of what's possible, and starting by dreaming of what's possible and what's best for young people, is something that I think has really been incredibly important for our team, as we've been working over these last few years to design this school. So what would it mean to, in the community that we are building and in the academic program that we are building, and that we're building collectively with our founding class and their families, what does it mean to be imagining worlds that are just and representing people's humanity and putting that at the center of our academic program? So if I were to summarize what our program is all about, as simply as I could, I would say this. I would say coming to high school at the Mastery School is about a journey of discovering your strengths, and experiencing ownership and pride in your work as you get to work on things that are real and matter. It's about reconnecting with the joy of learning that for a lot of students by the time they get to high school is something that they've lost, and remembering what motivates them in particular to want to grow. We believe that motivation is something that is intrinsic within each of us as a human being, and it's the systems that drain it out of us in all kinds of ways. And it's about cultivating a sense of belonging and purpose for each student, because without that sense of belonging, of psychological safety, and of purpose, we know that human beings can't learn. And I'm really thinking of what Daniel was sharing with the Baldwin quote before, and what does it take to give young Black boys and men that space to have a sense of purpose and expression. And so every aspect of what we do, this is what we're working toward. This is the goal. And I want to acknowledge a couple of the big pieces of the institution of school that we have tackled head on, and a big one is grading. So there are deep equity problems in the system of grading and how grading works in schools. I won't bore you with all of them right in this moment here on a Sunday afternoon, but I will say the historical legacy of grading is one that is deeply problematic and frankly racist. The historical legacy of the grading A through F system was based on the system of grading cuts of meat, and was designed to sort young people into who was deserving of an education, who was educable, and who was not, with a strong priority toward recreating the hierarchies of race, of class, of national origin that previously existed. And even today, so the systems of grading and how they work in schools often serve to replicate implicit biases at the individual teacher level, intentionally or usually unintentionally, particularly in the ways that subjective assessments of students come into play, and also the institutional biases, including whether grades are averaged across the semester, so that a student who might start from a place that is lower and end up at a higher place by the end of the semester doesn't get recognized for all the growth that they've had, but for an average of where they started and where they ended. So we don't have grades. We rejected the baggage of the whole grading system, and what we have instead is a mastery transcript. And again, this is a whole session in and of itself, which you may have already been to, but which we'd be happy to share more about. But mastery assessment, mastery portfolio, the approach that we use allows a student to present themselves by curating a portfolio of their best work that shows what they know and can do. And this is what ultimately is shared with colleges. This is what students build during the course of their 4 years with the support of their mentor and their teachers. And it puts students in the driver's seat of their learning rather than having grading be something that happens to them. And there's lots more to say about that if you're curious in the Q&A. I want to just also name another big area where schools often really struggle, and where the practices are frequently, frankly, deeply and inherently racist. And this is in the area of discipline. We use a restorative justice, restorative practices approach to discipline that looks at discipline as something that happens with young people and not to them or for them. And there's lots more to say about that too. But just want to acknowledge that this is another really core piece and building block of the school and the community that we have and that we're building. And then I want to just speak to a few of the major program elements here because, and try to highlight in them part of what I believe most helps students and particularly Black boys thrive. So you may have heard us talk at other events, and the students who've been to the visit day, we know that you may have gone and even done a little research on our website as part of the activity on the visit day about these program elements, but I'll just speak a little bit about them. I want to highlight community time first, and community time is a program element that exists under the leadership of Mr. Fattaroti. And we meet as a community twice a week. There's usually some full community component as well as time for students to meet in clubs or affinity groups, but there's a real centering of student voice and student leadership in this piece of the ways that we come together, that then infuses other parts of our time too. And the culture is one of creating a safe space for all, where all students are seen, heard, known, and valued for who they are. Mr. Facciarotti is the leader who sets the tone on that, and he does an extraordinary job in bringing students into that conversation. And I want to highlight this one first because, in fact, if students don't have that sense of belonging, it doesn't really matter what else we do. So that is really crucial. With some of the other pieces that are more traditionally academic that I'm going to talk about, I want to highlight our teaching methodology for just a moment, because there are many schools that talk about project-based learning, and that means very different things in different contexts. What it means to us is a highly developed teaching methodology that has been piloted and built out over the course of years, not only at Hawken, but at many other schools, notably rural and urban public schools, through the work of an organization that's one of our key partners that's called the Korda Institute for Teaching. And if you're interested in learning more about their work, I would suggest checking out their website. They have a lot of short videos about what this approach to teaching and learning with real-world problems can look like in a wide variety of schools. But just want to highlight that these are teaching methods that have been tested and vetted and designed, not just to reach one particular group or type of students, but to reach all students. So with regard to what this looks like in our core program elements, one of our major program elements is called macros. In macros, as you may know, students work on teams on a challenge presented by a community partner, and they work to develop a solution to a real and urgent challenge for this person. There's lots to highlight here, but I wanted to point out that the work of these community partners, Daniel is a great example, allows students to connect with role models beyond our faculty, who are also extraordinary role models, and get glimpses into what people's professional lives can look like and what the journey is that got them there, and see what possibilities for their futures. The work of being on collaborative teams is a huge component of our school, and something that really differentiates what we do. There's much more to say about that, but I will just point out that that discovery of strengths is really central, discovering your own strengths and also seeing other people's strengths, and the sense of empathy for other people's experiences that may be very different from your own. It happens in a completely different way when learning is a team sport rather than what it is in most schools, which is it's an individual sport. Just a couple more quick thoughts. Another our major program element for us is micros, and this is where a lot of the learning really gets personalized for students. So this is that opportunity to study something that you feel deeply passionate about and deeply connected to, and have that sense of bringing your whole self to your academic work. It's also a space for scaffolding and greater focus on what you most need more work on. And everyone needs to grow in lots of different ways. So there's none of that is about ranking or sorting or who needs more work and who doesn't. The whole approach is that everyone needs to grow in a lot of different ways, and it's about identifying what those are for me or for you, and having the space then to work on it with support. And finally, and I feel like I saved the best for last, wayfinding is really at the center in so many ways of students' experiences, because it's the core of where that journey of toward belonging and purpose takes place. Students are having these learning experiences in their macros and their micros, and then once a week individually and once a week in a group, they get an opportunity to meet with a mentor where there's space to process and to integrate and reflect on what's coming up for them, what they're learning, what new questions they have, what they might want to do next. This is also a space where it's not the only space, but a important space where students get to do work on their healthy identity development, what that looks like for young people, and is just crucial for the activities that often in school are put to the side or put to the margins. So I could, as I'm sure you can tell, talk about this for a very long time, but hopefully these few highlights are just a glimpse into how our program supports some of what we've been discussing this afternoon.
Do that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.